Aujourd'hui, je vais parler de one of the main reasons why I love the USA, right? Its incredible, almost naive level of optimism, as seen as a part of a response to a horrible tragedy, okay? Hey, XenPuck here. Another day, another level of absurdity observed, right? So by now, everyone's heard of the Florida Surfside condo collapse, right? Terrifying business, isn't it? But I'm always looking for the silver lining, right? Even in the most dire of catastrophes. So today, all I want to do is point out the only silver lining that I can think of when something so bad happens, right? So much wanton destruction that seems so indiscriminate that you'd think I'd be hard-pressed to find something positive about it. And yet, while I am a cynic, and I think maybe I'm softening in my early retirement, so that I did think of something good. And that's related to how the media coverage, is approaching the subject, right? And that's the reason why I love the USA so much. We're such a hopeful and optimistic people that after a 12-story building collapses in basically spectacular fashion, we've all seen the videos, the initial headlines read something like, 5 dead, 150 missing. Okay, reasonable when it just happened. And yet, up to a week later, now it's maybe a week or 10 days or so later, the headlines has changed to something akin to 20 dead, 140 unaccounted for / missing. That's the context, right? Now let me get to my point, right? Number one, how the tragedy is actually reported, or general tragedies, but especially, this is a great example, right, via this incident for the Florida condo, right? Take a moment and consider the implications of how the news is being made out. What does the media think that the still 100 plus missing people are doing after a whole week has passed exactly? That they're somehow miraculously hiding out in a basement and having a dance party? I mean, does any reasonable adult still think that any of these 100 plus people that are unaccounted for are still alive? I mean, how? You know how human beings, we are all incredibly fragile, right? Compared to the building materials that we use, right? We can die from falling onto like a kitchen counter corner at the wrong angle, or in our bathtubs if you're relatively old enough, right? You slip and fall, hit your head on a porcelain tub, and you're done. I mean, how could anything outside of a miracle cause any of these people who live in a collapsed building in the middle of the night still be alive? I mean, I would have considered that a miracle after a day or two to find someone still living. But after a week? I mean, are you serious? Are the people at the papers like mentally slow? No, I don't think that's the issue, right? I don't think that the reporters across all the media are mentally challenged, right? So I can only attribute to this style of reporting to the incredible level of optimism, right? I think this is unique to Americans, right? That it's so incredible that it borders on absurdity, really, right? I think if America was a person and given the choice between hearing the good news or the bad news first, it would definitely hear the good news first, right? It's like the opposite of me. I think I would pick the bad news first, right? I mean, that's the same idea as how I would choose to, report this news, right? I mean, if I'm being a real cynic, my comment first would have been, everybody in the building is dead or most likely dead, but we're always on the lookout for like a Bruce Willis via Unbreakable type of situation and hope that a new mutant race of indestructible humanoid will indeed be discovered amongst the wreckage. But that's just very unlikely to happen, right? So my point is, why is it that I would report news of this type differently, right? Well, as a cynic, why I would give the bad news first? I don't know, because if I had a relative in that catastrophe, wouldn't I rather think I've lost that person? And then maybe later discover against all odds that they might still be alive? Wouldn't that give me an incredible high of a joyful moment instead of, what I get from the reality that is American media, right, as a whole, that decides to hold on to this absurd level of optimism that someone without food, water, medication, and more than 100 people in this situation that lives in a concrete building that now resembles a crater could still somehow not only be hanging out to life, but think about, even if they were still somehow alive, hanging out to lives, would those be lives that are worth living? I mean, I think it's a miracle if they're still breathing, right? But I think there's actually a 0% chance that they'd be whole in any reasonable measure of the word, right? That's how cynical I am, right? I'm thinking about they've got to be losing limbs, right? But that's what the media is holding on to, right? And after 2 whole weeks, we could still drag out maybe 1 or 2 very resilient human beings, or very, very lucky human beings. But then those 1 or 2 people would probably have to be hooked up to a tube for the rest of their lives, right? So that is why, I mean, I would rather assume the worst and then be surprised, if I'm wrong, right? Wouldn't that make me happier? That's usually how I would think about it, right? But I can't help, to be honest, be shocked by the American style of coverage. And the more I read it, though, I kind of, it grows on me, right? The reality that it's shoved in my face, right? Because this is what Americans do, right? Assume the best all the time, right? We put even those with the slimmest chance of survival as unaccounted for, rather than dead with a tiny, tiny sliver chance of resurrection, right? By the way, this term unaccounted for, I mean, to me, that's what you call somebody who's been on a bender and hasn't returned home the next day, right? Because he's passed out on a park bench somewhere, or riding the subway back and forth until the next rush hour, and commuters kick him off, right? Not usually a group of people who's at best pinned under tons of steel and concrete, who probably at this point can't even yell for help, right? Because they don't have any food. Again, the silver lining to me is exactly this point. That's why I love this country, right? We as a collective has decided to stare reality in the face and basically say, no, until we're absolutely 100% sure, right? We will not call it like it probably is, but what we think it is, right? I keep thinking to myself that after a week of this, maybe one day the papers will change their estimates to all of a sudden the 100 plus to be assumed dead, right? Because it's almost physically impossible for them to be alive. But my expectation keeps getting thwarted, right? I mean, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe this is the real reason behind America's dominance in the world, right? It's maybe precisely because this country's so young that it can remain so obliviously optimistic, right? I mean, I cannot explain the reasons behind what seems to most people in the world, I would assume, as irrational optimism. And yet, maybe this is how our country deals with trauma, right? When what appears to be natural disasters happen and we all feel helpless, this type of optimism is the only way to keep our spirits up. Maybe if we keep saying that these 100 plus people are just out of sight, unaccounted for, that somehow in the rubble we'd get a few back to tell us the harrowing tales of their miraculous survival. I mean, maybe that's it, that we love that unlikely comeback story and we want to make sure that we're ready to accept it. I mean, at the end of the day, I hope you guys know I'm definitely not knocking on the optimism. It's just very different from how I was taught or how I was conditioned. But hey, I love the optimism, right? I wish I had more of it, right? Heck, I want to quote one of the mottos of one of my old favorite shows. The motto goes, I want to believe. I think that applies here. Anyway, comment, like, or whatever you like. Tell me, am I instinctively correct, or is the rest of America more right? Could go either way. Cheers.